I want you to steal my $299,000 per month Google Ads strategy we just implemented across this automotive e-commerce brand we've been working with. And although my team will hate me for revealing this strategy, stick with me until the end because I'm going to break it all down for you step by step so you can implement it across your own store. Now, flashback, before we actually deep dive into this strategy, figure out how we generated almost $299,000 for this brand within just a 30-day period, let's understand this brand in a bit deeper detail. This brand is specifically in the automotive industry, selling different types of headlights for different types of cars in general, pickup trucks, SUVs, sedans, etc. So it's a brand in a very specific niche, and as a result, a lot of the searches that get done for the products this brand sells are just as specific along with it. Because the thing is, within a niche like this, it's very difficult to just rank for a keyword like Ford Raptor headlights and get sales because there's different years of Ford Raptors, there are different styles and builds of Ford Raptors, and not any specific generic headlight can work on all of the models, which makes it that much more difficult of a niche to scale with. But despite that, we were able to add a consistency in terms of the overall ROI and the revenue. As we can see here, it says the overall conversion value is 184,000. That's because this value has not taken the recent attribution period into consideration just yet, and this brand has a very large attribution period of roughly 14 days just because it is a high ticket brand. Because as we can see, since that time period, it has already generated over $100,000 in extra revenue. And the best part is the overall ROI is a 39x. No, this is not a typo. This is not some fake inspect elements I did either, because if we refresh it right now, we can see that the ROAS is still the same. And this is purely coming from a variety of different campaign strategies we have running and the overall authority this brand has built. Because see, the thing is, this brand didn't start last night on Google or in general. It has been running now for over a decade just on the Google Ads platform itself. And it has been active for over 20 years in the industry, which means it not only has a very solid foundation in terms of Facebook ads, TikTok ads, and everything in between, but at the same time, there's just a lot of individuals searching for this brand directly and interacting with this brand, even with cold traffic searches, because this brand is a well-known brand within this industry. So having some sort of authority built within your industry goes a very long way, especially with Google Ads. But the thing is, although we started working with this brand on February 23rd of this year, so if we look from February 23rd all the way to when I'm recording this video, April 28th, we can see overall this brand has done about $500,000 in revenue at an 18x ROI on average. This is for cold traffic acquisition. But the craziest part is for this brand, and where kind of we enter the picture, is that since January of 2025 all the way to the end of December, this brand, although it was absolutely crushing it with the last agency, completely started to disregard Google Ads and just lowered their overall ad spend, going from basically spending a considerable amount of money in a given month, for example, $30,000 in March, and during its peak, $34,000, to then going all the way down to $24,000 and eventually just shutting off Google Ads completely for the beginning portion of 2026. So if we look right here, before we actually begin work, we can see the overall ad spend drop down to $3,700. Why would a brand that's so successful on Google, has generated $5 million from revenue, cut out Google completely? And the answer actually lies in the distinction between branded versus non-branded traffic. Unfortunately, the last agency this brand was working with was completely dishonest with the overall campaigns they had running, with the overall scale that they achieved, because although these numbers on the front end seem like insane numbers, achieving basically an 18x ROAS on $250,000 in ad spend, the reality was in the back end, the picture was completely different, because basically 70% of the revenue coming for this brand, this $5 million, 70% of it was from branded searches. If we look right here, these are recently excluded, but during that time, majority of the revenue was coming from the brand keywords itself. $500,000 from the top branded keyword, then $371,000 from the next one, then $114,000, so on and so forth. Basically, the top 10 keywords, all of the keywords that I am specifically choosing right here, all these 10 were all branded keywords, which meant this $3 million was highly inflated. And the unfortunate thing was that last agency was basically presenting reports in such a way that these numbers were completely hidden from the CEO, the CMO's point of view. And because they had very little knowledge of Google Ads, they did not find out that all of this was branded traffic until they did an end of year review and figured out that they were basically regenerating the sales they were already bound to get in. The worst part of all was it wasn't just one campaign or two campaigns generating these branded sales. It was basically all of this scale that this last agency had introduced through all of these 50 campaigns, basically doing the same job of driving forth branded traffic. And the biggest problem of all was because there was no real cold traffic acquisition in play, it was just basically built on brand traffic influence. All of this horizontal scale, any further campaigns they added, was all leading towards the brand attracting more and more of the retargeting customers because it didn't know any better. The algorithm had literally zero idea of what a real cold traffic customer meant for this brand. So the brand ended up with these unnecessary campaigns, Performance Max campaign, Standard Shopping, and for some reason, they were also going after search and demand gen, which historically, just based on my experience within this industry, anything besides shopping placements just flops completely because this audience is not geared to shop without looking at the product image first to understand how it would look overall on their specific vehicle, if it would make it look better, worse, etc. Because see, the thing is, in this industry, and this might be the same for your industry as well, just the specifications of the product itself don't cut it. The product itself needs to look visually appealing. It needs to match your ride. It needs to match the overall aesthetic of your car for it to even be worth a purchase, so that this brand relies heavily on shopping placements. But unfortunately for this brand, they were spreading their margins way too thin by just expanding onto placements that just didn't make sense at this point of time for this brand. And to top it off, when we first began auditing this brand, and I always like to look at the last 30 to 90 days worth of data, so I looked at basically November to December, what I came to understand was that this campaign approach basically was not backed by any sort of strategy in place. Because if we look at the overall campaigns that were running during this time, which the good thing they had done was cut it from 15 campaigns to now 8, but the problem was there was still a very big influx of internal bidding going on, because a lot of these Performance Max campaigns, for example, had the same exact SKUs, had the same exact products running side by side. There was repetition of these Standard Shopping campaigns. Although it was supposed to be segregated based on the specific sub-collection, product collection, there was really no back-end strategy in place, which is why one campaign was running at a 17x ROAS, the other one was running at a 4x ROAS, and the other one was at almost a 6x ROAS. This was because a lot of these campaigns that had a very high ROI still had a heavy influence of branded traffic, thus skewing all of the results. And in terms of the actual segmentation on a deeper level, if we go inside this campaign, for example, look at the specific products, one thing that I absolutely hated about this brand when we first audited was that this brand and the specific strategy that this brand had running had products in here which didn't make sense. Basically, they had products in here which were $900 in the same campaign as a product which was only $3. And obviously, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to understand that a person who has the ability to buy a $980 product is a very different person in terms of their demographic, what their income levels are, what their desires are, etc., than a person who can only afford a $3 or a $4 or a $5 product simply because of the nature of the overall ICP. And this was getting clogged up all inside one approach during the time this last agency was working with them, which was further derailing them from actually reaching cold traffic customers and actually getting to them at a profitable overall ROI. But the biggest kind of nail in the coffin, which this kind of led me into finding out about, was the fact that despite spending $20,000, $30,000 a month in general, they had a total of 3,801 SKUs active during this time from the period of November to December. But if we look at the SKUs which had less than one click during this time, despite getting impressions, we can see that overall, this brand out of 3,000 SKUs had 1,300 SKUs, basically 1/3 of their entire product catalog, just sitting in their product feed, not getting a single link click, not getting any sort of ad spend, just kind of sitting there, rotting away and acting as a parasite within their entire accounts. Because see, the thing is, any specific SKUs that don't get any link clicks, that don't get any ad spend during a portion of time, whether it be 30 days, 60 days, is basically a red flag to the Google Ads algorithm, because this makes the algorithm believe that there is something wrong with this brand. Hence the reason why it doesn't have any sorts of clicks on that specific SKU, why there's no sorts of interaction going on within that individual brand. And all of this was boiling down to the fact of negligence from the last agency, but also the fact that their product feed, their foundation that everything is built off of, seemed like a third grader had created it blindfolded with no real product image testing strategy in place. The titles looked like they were created by someone blindfolded who didn't know how to write or read. And overall, the feed was just a big mess, which was leading to the main issues that this brand was facing, which was this overall plateau they had reached and just the inability to scale with Google Ads. Flash forward February 2023, after not really running Google Ads for the entirety of January and basically half of February, they decided that Google Ads was worth one more try, simply because historically Google had provided some cold traffic scale. And even though they had completely shut off the budget, even though during that time they were barely spending $2,000-$3,000 a month, they were still able to generate about $90,000 in revenue, which brought them to Google Ads as a final resort. And that's essentially where we began working together, handling their Google Ads, which, by the way, if you run a brand making $50,000 or more per month in revenue, you need some extra help scaling your brand to the next level with Google Ads. Scan the QR code on the screen or click the link in the description below to directly schedule a call with me, and let's see how we can potentially work together and make all of this happen. But first and foremost, when we entered this brand, what we didn't want to do was repeat the same mistakes that the last agency had done, which was launch a bunch of stuff, just hope and pray that it doesn't go after branded traffic. So instead of just going into the campaigns directly, we started with a simple 1-1-1 approach, which stood for essentially one standard shopping campaign going after all of their SKUs, one performance max campaign doing the same exact thing, of course, focusing more on non-branded traffic, and then one branded search campaign running at $10 a day just to get any sort of lost traction and to prevent competitors from entering the market and stealing their overall revenue. But the biggest kind of strategy we implemented during the first 7 to 10 days of working together was not on the campaign side, but rather on the product feed. We literally uprooted their entire product feed, re-strategized from the product images, making sure they were the opposite of their competition, because during that time, we had realized that a lot of this high CTR was actually coming from branded traffic, and the products and SKUs which were actually going after non-branded traffic had a much lower CTR, for example, a 0.56%, 0.91%. We uprooted their product image strategy to be the opposite of the competition by researching what competitors were doing for the biggest cold traffic keywords within this industry, of course, making sure that they were broad keywords. Second, we redid their product title strategy, taking away the elements of brand influence, because initially what they had was basically their brand keyword, the brand name, and of course, because it was in the start or middle of the product title, Google was giving that more preference versus all of the keywords that came after that. So essentially, we did competitor research, figured out that majority of the competitors within this industry don't even rely on their brand name itself, but rather focus on the specifications, add high perceived value, and specific SEO keywords, which users within this industry want to shop with. And of course, looking at the refined results section was the biggest unlock, because that meant we didn't have to guess and we could basically make a product title that was geared around what the users were already searching for, and while using the insight section and the data we already had to our benefits. But combine that with a Google Merchant Center strategy that was focused on being the opposite. So in this industry, because majority of the competitors don't have any sorts of product reviews, we added our product reviews for the products which made sense, and that was enough to boost the CTR, boost the overall authority without having brand influence get mixed up. But we did all of this with the intention and the goal of focusing 90% of the budget on non-branded traffic from the get-go and 10% or less on branded traffic for that momentum aspect, with of course only a shopping-based approach, because all of these campaigns running during that time was basically shopping, the standard shopping. The PMAX was also feed only. But once we had that initial foundation in place, it was a matter of just letting these campaigns run and gather data, because what we started to realize is in the first 3 weeks of March, we started to get a lot of good traction coming in from these campaigns, which allowed us to then go after some new tests which we wanted to do in terms of cold prospecting. Like for example, we launched this search campaign, which was a cold traffic search campaign, which is why the ROAS was so low and it ended up being a complete flop. But that's what we wanted to understand for this specific brand, to know if search campaigns or anything beyond shopping was worth pursuing in this situation. But what we came to realize was overall, despite any of the tests that we were doing, shopping was again leading with, of course, branded search on the side. But at this point, the branded search relevance had become completely negligent because we had only spent $700 across a 22-day period, whereas previously with the previous agency, they were literally spending that much on a daily basis just going after branded traffic. And despite spending such a low amount, this brand was still attracting a lot of high ticket sales from those branded keywords, which was essentially unavoidable at this point. That's something we needed to get through the door so that, number one, we could feed the algorithm on a top level more data as to what the perfect cold traffic customer also looked like, but also number two, prevent the competitors from entering the market and stealing any traffic share. But at this point, we had figured out that there was nothing that could work better than just the shopping approach. So what we did is, instead of launching more stuff, instead of just making things a lot more complicated, we completely reduced the overall influence of branded traffic, because in the next 3 weeks, it ended up spending only about $500. Of course, keeping the budget at only $10 per day or less. But at the same time, we started to really make some decent traction with the overall shopping campaigns and with the standard shopping campaigns we had initially launched. And to kind of support this momentum, instead of going in, launching more stuff, adding in more variability, we kept things simple. We focused on only increasing the budget and only keeping the ship steady, which it got to the point where they were getting so many orders and such a new influx of new customer acquisition that we actually had to slow down the budget and reduce the budget, which is why in the last 30 days we have considerably killed off all of the campaigns and only let one performance max campaign, which is 100% cold traffic acquisition focus, running, simply because now they have to improve their overall fulfillment process. They also have hired an external sales team which will door to door going after installers in their local area in the East Coast of the United States, trying to push a lot of these orders forward, get them installed, so on and so forth. So now they're dealing with a completely different set of problems that was basically non-existent just 2 months prior. And once all of the fulfillment processes are properly optimized, then it's going to be all about vertical scale, because scaling this brand for the last 2 months has made me realize a few crucial things. Number one, 9 times out of 10, consolidation works more than segregation. This brand was spending $20,000, $30,000 a month just 6 months prior, an extremely segregated campaign strategy with 8-10 different campaigns running, and just cutting it down to one major campaign approach, just basically running it with non-branded traffic keywords only, has allowed us to retain basically the same amount of revenue without sacrificing any profitability and without sacrificing on the brand versus non-branded influence. But in addition to that, what we have come to realize is some brands just respond better to vertical scaling in terms of increasing budgets and decreasing restrictions over horizontal scaling. So what we have done here is we have basically run it still with a feed-only approach. Again, the consolidation strategy still is in play to this date. We don't even have any signals running at the moment because we want to keep the ship steady. We don't want any extra influx of traffic getting diluted because of the signals we add in here. And we have given it a very healthy ROAS target of 700%, which is much lower than what it is actually achieving. Most brand owners make this mistake of going in and setting restrictions that are way above what the actual campaigns are truly achieving or what the accounts has historically achieved. And as a result, and then they're surprised why the account is struggling so much, why it's not really achieving the overall desired results based on the expectations. But from all of this scale, from all of these campaigns we launched, from the flops we had overall, here's the main thing that you want to understand, which we also ended up understanding throughout the process. The goal of all of these campaigns you ever launch, with all of these tests that you ever do, isn't just to get profitable from the get-go. It's rather to understand what works for your brand, number one, but also number two, what doesn't work for your brand, so that you can actually steer clear from it in the future and get to that specific approach which makes sense for your brand. Because all of those search campaigns we launched, all of those shopping campaigns we launched, ended up directing us towards this one individual Performance Max campaign, which now has all of that data that it got from the previous approaches and is now able to run at a much more profitable and much more consistent ROI, and in terms of revenue as well, because we got through all of that testing. And for the time being, for this brand, the spend will remain the same, but the overall ROAS will now continue to increase, going from basically that 39x ROAS we have to a much higher level, focusing on, of course, only the non-branded influence. So there you have it, the exact strategy responsible for blowing up this automotive brand to over $299,000 a month with Google Ads exclusively to non-branded traffic. Just a focus on simple strategies, starting with a high quality foundation and then playing into a campaign strategy that's consolidated and based around the keywords that attract real customers, not just retargeting sales. But if you run a brand making $50,000 a month or more in revenue, you need extra help scaling to the next level with Google Ads, scan the QR code on the screen or click the first link in the description below to directly schedule a call with me, and let's see how we can potentially work together to make all of this happen.